Picture this: a man walks into what he believes is a sacred union, a lifelong alliance forged in love, mutual growth, and shared purpose. He imagines companionship, a partner in both vision and struggle. But as the years pass, he doesn't find himself expanded, he finds himself erased. The person he once was begins to dissolve, not in a moment of crisis, but through a series of quiet, unnoticed abandonments. His friendships, slowly replaced by obligations he didn't consciously agree to. His passions, reduced to guilty pleasures he must sneak between errands and expectations. His time, no longer his own, parceled out in service of tasks that drain more than they nourish. But what's most unsettling is that this wasn't done to him. It happened through him, through concessions he believed were virtuous, through choices he thought proved devotion. No chains, no threats, just the soft tyranny of self-sacrifice performed in the name of love. This is not some tragic anomaly, it's a deeply embedded ritual disguised as adulthood. A societal script written long before he could question the lines he was rehearsing. The transformation is slow, invisible, and almost beautiful in its deception. He thinks he's growing into a man. In truth, he's being domesticated into a function. Not by brute force, but by something far more subtle, philosophical erosion. The erosion of his essence, his preferences, his spontaneity, shaved away little by little. A night out declined here. A dream deferred there. A silence swallowed in the name of peace. One, it's not a big deal, after another, until the man in the mirror is a stranger who exists mostly to maintain the comfort of others. He didn't lose himself because of hatred or malice. He lost himself because love, at least the version sold to him, demanded his extinction in exchange for harmony. He entered not a relationship, but an ideological apparatus designed to reprogram him. And like all powerful systems, it didn't require violence to work. It only needed his agreement. His noble intentions, loyalty, duty, responsibility, became the very tools that dismantled his individuality. Not all at once, but like water carving stone, slowly, silently, and with devastating precision. Society applauds this man, the ever-reliable one, the steady hand, the foundation others build upon. He's called the backbone of the family, the unshakable force, the one who holds everything together. But beneath this applause is a quiet betrayal. Because while he is being praised, he is also being reshaped. Not honored for who he is, but molded into what is needed of him. The same traits that earned him admiration now make him useful, and in being useful, he becomes expendable. His income, once a symbol of his ambition, becomes communal property, divided without question. His dreams, once vibrant and unrestrained, are now sifted through a silent approval process, filtered by someone else's comfort, convenience, or timing. And his once vast sense of self, filled with infinite possibilities, is now folded into a tight, confined identity labeled provider. This isn't some unintended consequence of love, it's often the quiet objective. And the most devastating part is that it's presented as virtue. The erosion of self isn't packaged as loss, it's sold as growth. The man doesn't even know he's being hollowed out, because the tools used are ideals he respects. Concepts like loyalty, commitment, and protection are wielded like scalpels, not to wound him, but to slowly carve away everything that makes him whole. And because these ideals carry moral weight, he cannot protest without feeling like he's failing. To desire solitude, space, or creative freedom becomes selfish. To assert boundaries feels like betrayal. So he tells himself he's being mature, that this is what it means to be a man. But in reality, what he calls growth is often just a subtle form of self-burial. This is not love, it's programming. The philosophical heartbreak is that these once beautiful values have been quietly weaponized. And it's not done maliciously, it's done culturally, institutionally, even romantically. What Nietzsche warned us about, trading authenticity for security, has become the norm, and most men don't see it until the exchange is irreversible. They've been taught to treat self-neglect as nobility. They've been celebrated for abandoning themselves. And in this celebration, the tragedy deepens. Because the man is applauded, not as he truly is, but as a sanitized, functional version of what others need him to be. At some point, the man stops being a victim of the system and starts participating in it. Not out of weakness, but out of a misguided sense of righteousness. He becomes the silent architect of his own enclosure, laying each brick with hands that believe they're building a sanctuary. What makes the trap so devastating is not its cruelty, it's how it convinces him that submission is moral, that silence is noble, that discomfort is a spiritual rite of passage. So he stops resisting. He calls the shrinking of his soul growth. He interprets exhaustion as purpose. And slowly, without realizing it, he learns to love the very bars that imprison him. He doesn't rebel, he redecorates the cage. He adds curtains to his confinement. He memorizes the pattern of the walls and calls it stability. And by the time a flicker of rebellion emerges, it's too late. The damage isn't loud, it's spiritual, silent, woven into his identity. The man who once dreamed loudly now whispers permission to his own desires. As Carl Jung once suggested, the deepest fear isn't discovering who we truly are, it's waking up and realizing we've become someone we never meant to be, shaped by forces we never questioned. Even the language we use reveals the hidden truth. We joke about marriage like it's a sentence, tied down, ball and chain, the old ball and chain, taking the plunge. Harmless phrases, we say. Just humor. But humor is often how the unconscious leaks out. Behind those words is a buried truth we're too afraid to confront openly, that in this social ritual, something priceless is often exchanged: freedom, spontaneity, identity, for the illusion of partnership. But here's where philosophy refuses to stay quiet. It holds the mirror steady and asks the one question no one dares voice: if you're giving everything, your time, your energy, your inner life, your voice, your income, your autonomy, what exactly are you receiving in return that could possibly balance the scale? If what you gain is a role, not a relationship, a duty, not a dialogue, then is that a bond of love or a cleverly disguised transaction? We grow up believing that love is the universal solution, that it redeems, transforms, and completes us. But within this cultural blueprint, love quietly shifts from being a sacred connection to a conditional contract. It becomes something a man must continuously earn through his performance. He's not loved for who he is, but for how well he fulfills a role. To keep the relationship intact, he must constantly regulate himself, his words, his tone, his decisions, around someone else's emotional weather. Over time, he becomes less of a person and more of a sponge, absorbing tension, easing conflict, and softening the discomfort that others don't want to face. His inner world is no longer his to inhabit, it becomes an emotional landfill for the household. This isn't harmony, it's conditioning. Happy wife, happy life might sound like wisdom, but it's actually quiet psychological programming. A mantra disguised as advice, repeating until the man internalizes one truth: his peace doesn't matter unless it serves hers. And when you peel back the layers, you see that this isn't about individual malice or moral failure, it's about inherited systems. We're not confronting villains, we're confronting unconscious patterns hardwired by evolution and reinforced by culture. Just as men are trained to equate worth with usefulness, many women have been historically shaped by another pressure: survival through security. Thousands of years of evolutionary necessity forged instincts to protect, provide, and preserve stability. So, when a woman seeks emotional control, material consistency, or power within the relationship, it isn't always manipulation, it's deeply encoded instinct. What once kept her ancestors alive has now been retrofitted with the tools of the modern world: court systems, societal sympathy, and psychological framing that grants her control without ever asking for accountability. But here's where the philosophical thread tightens. In this structure, the man becomes currency. His income is security, his presence is stability, his emotional labor is normalization. His humanity becomes invisible beneath the layers of utility. And the moment he can no longer provide, whether he burns out, breaks down, or simply becomes familiar, the value system recalibrates. He's no longer seen as essential. He's seen as replaceable. And this isn't just theory, it's observable. Statistics don't lie. The overwhelming majority of modern divorces are initiated by women, not always in times of danger or dysfunction, but often in moments of stasis. When the emotional or material yield starts to flatten, the system quietly moves on. It's not about cruelty, it's about calculus. And the man who believed love was unconditional finds out, too late, that the conditions were simply unspoken. The unraveling doesn't end when the relationship dissolves. In fact, for many men, the real descent begins after the goodbye. Because even when the emotional bond has disintegrated, the obligations remain etched in law. The man who once held a place at the dinner table is now relegated to a distant role, yet expected to keep the machine running from the outside. His name is removed from the story, but his labor continues to finance the chapters. Child support, alimony, asset division, legal instruments ensure that his responsibility survives the love that once justified it. He's still the engine, but no longer the driver. The house he helped build may no longer be his, but the cost of its upkeep follows him like a shadow. It's not closure, it's a lifelong contract with no presence required. This isn't separation. It's sanctioned exile with direct deposit. And what this does to a man isn't just financial, it's spiritual sabotage. He begins to feel like a trespasser in his own life. His voice, once encouraged, now feels like an intrusion. His desires, reframed as threats. He learns to see his silence as his safest offering. Not because he lacks thoughts or fire, but because every previous assertion ended in backlash, accusation, or loss. Over time, this doesn't just wear him down, it rewires him. He no longer expects freedom. He forgets what autonomy feels like. The pain has become familiar, and so he calls it peace. He stops pushing back and calls it maturity. He calls surrender wisdom, because resistance hurts too much. This psychological collapse has a name, learned helplessness, but in his world, it's called being a good man. He believes, falsely but deeply, that real love demands the removal of self. And then, perhaps most tragically, the spell completes itself. He becomes a defender of the very architecture that deconstructed him. He tells younger men that this is simply life, that this quiet suffering is strength, that the hollow ache in his chest is just what happens when you grow up. He starts quoting sacrifice as virtue, commitment as masculinity, and endurance as enlightenment, without ever asking what exactly is being endured. He becomes a mouthpiece for a system that devoured him. This is no longer just a man surviving. This is a man baptizing his wounds in philosophy. He doesn't recognize the cage because he's adorned it with meaning. He confuses fatigue for purpose, scar tissue for character, and the silence where his voice used to be. He calls it honor. He tells himself, and others, that real men stick it out, even when what's left of them is barely breathing. He doesn't just inhabit the prison. He paints the walls, polishes the chains, and offers the keys to others, dressed as wisdom. Philosophy, at its core, asks the one question society fears most: must it be this way? Schopenhauer, in his cold clarity, revealed that fulfillment isn't found in extracting more from others, but in depending on them less. The wisest man isn't the one who survives the system, but the one who sees it for what it is, and chooses differently. Freedom isn't something granted, it's protected from the beginning. Marriage, in many cases, is no longer intimacy, it's negotiation. And whoever has fewer choices will always lose more. That's why the man rooted in thought, inner clarity, and self-worth is a threat. He cannot be shamed into silence or sacrifice. He examines everything like a stoic. What's the cost? What's the gain? Is it fair? But most men never ask. They're raised to be shields for others, never shields for themselves. So they enter lopsided unions, praying that sacrifice will equal love, forgetting that no amount of effort can undo the laws of nature. Here's the hard truth: the moment you become indispensable to someone's comfort, they often stop seeing you as a person. You become a function, not a presence, a resource, not a soul. Love shifts from being about who you are to what you provide. And when your usefulness fades, so does the affection. This isn't bitterness toward marriage or women, it's a call to stay awake. A man must remain whole, conscious, and rooted in himself. The one who moves from inner abundance, who doesn't chase or overgive, becomes rare. And that rarity commands respect. Because women aren't responding to words, they're responding to energy. They're drawn to presence, not compliance. To self-possession, not sacrifice. Yet men are shamed for strength until they're too broken to lead. And it's this quiet contradiction that slowly destroys the very connection they were trying to protect. Nice guys don't finish last because they're kind, they finish last because they're expected. Predictable. Easily read, easily used. Philosophy reminds us that meaning is not something we stumble into through others, it must be forged within, deliberately. A man who discovers purpose in himself no longer clings to people for validation. He doesn't give to be accepted, he gives because he is full. From that quiet abundance, he offers connection that uplifts, not attachment that drains. He becomes a partner who raises the standard, not someone who slowly dissolves for the sake of peace. He knows how to be tender without being timid, generous without being depleted, loving without erasing his own center. And because that kind of man is rare, he becomes untouchable in the best way, untouchable by guilt, by manipulation, by the need to prove his worth through suffering. But the path to becoming that man is not glamorous. It's solitary, misunderstood, and resisted at every turn. Society doesn't know what to do with a man who doesn't beg to be chosen, who isn't driven by hunger, but by discernment. Such men threaten the system because they can't be bent. They can't be owned. And so, they are labeled cold, arrogant, difficult. Not because they are, but because their strength exposes the weakness in everything around them. Here's the paradox most never see. The second you no longer need anything from others to feel complete, you finally become magnetic. Not from effort, but from presence. Not because you gave up who you are to be accepted, but because you stood still in your truth, and someone with eyes clear enough recognized your worth. The real question isn't whether marriage is good or bad, it's whether you stepped into it from wholeness or desperation, from self-awareness or survival instinct, from love or fear of being alone. In a world built on male submission, the fiercest revolution is a man who refuses to abandon himself. So choose clarity, choose alignment, choose the version of you that doesn't vanish to be loved.